Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Howitzer, and you are in the line of fire. Now this video is going to be the start of two new web series. The first one is going to be called Howitzer's Line of Fire, and in it I will review comic book movies from Superman all the way up to Guardians of the Galaxy, and beyond once those come out. I'll just be putting in my 2 cents about each movie, and giving recommendations, and then telling you which ones to stay far, far away from. Judge Dredd. Now in the second one, I will be looking at movies that were almost made. Comic book movies that have scripts, or even started production, but were never released or never made, and I'm going to be calling that one Hypertime. But before we get into either of those subjects, I feel like we should talk about the history behind comic book movies. The earliest comic book movies were Saturday morning movie serials. They showed up not too long after superheroes became prominent in comics. Captain Marvel, Batman, Captain America, and Superman all received their own serials. They were made for children and pretty much don't hold up very well. Although right around the same time, Fleischer and later Famous Studios released a series of Technicolor cartoon shorts starring Superman. Those are very good, mostly because they feature the voices of Bud Collyer and Joan Alexander as Superman and Lois Lane respectively. The Fleischer cartoons were nominated for an Academy Award in 1941 and were single-handedly responsible for giving Superman the power of flight. Now those of you more familiar with comic book history in the audience know that after the end of World War II, superheroes came under fire by a psychiatrist named Frederick Wertham with a book called Seduction of the Innocent. If you've ever wondered how comics went from their pulpy, gritty roots in the Golden Age to the goofy and campy Silver Age, look no further than Seduction of the Innocent by Frederick Wertham. In it, Wertham pretty much blamed the comic industry for juvenile delinquency. He exaggerated a lot of his research, and his theories were soon proven false. But America was a fearful place at the time. McCarthy was just around the corner. The comics industry established the Comics Code Authority to self-censor their work, and superheroes were essentially castrated. They became nothing but kid stuff and all but disappeared from other forms of media, save for Superman's radio show and later the George Reeves TV show. However, in 1965, superhero media made a huge comeback when Batman came to TV. The Batman TV series, and later the movie in 1966, may have returned superheroes to the spotlight, but they were still lighthearted, campy, goofy, and not at all taken seriously. However, in 1978, after the success of Star Wars the year before, all of that changed. Superman, directed by Richard Donner, written by Mario Puzo, and starring Christopher Reeve as Superman, took the world by storm and proved that superheroes can and should be taken seriously in Hollywood. Until the gods of irony cursed the franchise with Superman 3, Superman 4, and Supergirl. We will be covering all 3 of those, by the way. Anyway, Superman and its equally good and successful sequel, Superman 2, ushered in the first true era of comic book movies. This era lasted from Superman to Blade, and included such classics as Tim Burton's Batman, Batman Returns, and The Crow, as well as some utter crap like the Schumacher Batman movies, Howard the Duck, and Judge Dredd. We'll be looking at Judge Dredd. As previously stated, this first era drew to a close in 1998 with Blade, which starred Wesley Snipes in the title role. Blade is an interesting movie in that it had little to do with the comic it was based on, but it completely changed the way that Blade was written in the comics. It also took the idea presented by Tim Burton's Batman, namely that superheroes could be darker and edgier, and cranked it up to 11. It became Marvel's first successful property on screen, earning over $130 million on a budget of $40 million. Now before we move on to the new millennium and the second era of comic book movies, have to talk about Marvel's state at the end of the 90s. Marvel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and so to get themselves out of debt, they had to sell off the film rights to several of their intellectual properties. That's why Spider-Man ended up being made by Sony Pictures, while 20th Century Fox handled X-Men and Fantastic Four. The second era of superhero movies begins in 2000 with the release of Bryan Singer's X-Men, which basically set the tone for all the movies to follow. They'd still have a slight edge to them, but all in all they'd end up being on the lighter end of PG-13, so that they could sell more toys, not alienate the child audiences, who always make superheroes money by buying toys. Anyway, X-Men was a huge success, making nearly $300 million at the box office. In 2002, Marvel followed up with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and the awesome sequel to Blade. 2003 saw the release of X2, as well as a very boring Hulk movie and a very disappointing Daredevil film. Marvel kept plugging away, though. They released another Spider-Man movie in 2004, as well as an excellent Punisher film, and a really crappy final sequel to Blade. You're probably noticing that I'm talking mostly about Marvel. That's because no one else really did anything. Sure, Dark Horse finally got itself a movie with Hellboy, but DC didn't have any major contributions until around 2005. In fact, their only early contributions were The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Catwoman. Yeah. DC didn't get its act together until 2005 when it released V for Vendetta and Batman Begins. Both V and Batman showcased what would become the norm for DC in the current comic book movie era. But DC still put out crap in the second era like Superman Returns and Constantine. Seriously. Keanu Reeves, he's not even British or blonde. And why wasn't he wearing his trench coat? What is wrong with you? Were you purposefully trying to make the worst Constantine movie possible? Okay, alright. I'm rambling now. The point is, both Marvel and DC had really spotty track records during the second era. This would quickly change with the third era. In 2008, two movies came out that represented a new direction and a new standard of quality for both Marvel Studios and DC. The Marvel movie was Iron Man, which took a character that nobody really cared about and made him extremely popular, while also launching the cinematic universe that's still going on today. In other words, they did the antithesis of what DC would later do with Green Lantern. Anyway, the film that changed things for DC was The Dark Knight, which made it very clear that DC was going for an edgier, more grounded, more realistic take on their properties, and that they weren't too preoccupied with little things like humor. At this point, we're at modern times, and everyone's really aware of what's going on. DC is just now setting out to establish their universe, while Marvel very much has an established universe that it's building on. So let's move away from the history and get to the purpose of my shows. Like I said at the beginning of this video, Howitzer's Line of Fire is a review show where I'll be looking at all the comic book movies. Now this is not just limited to superhero movies. I'll also be looking at movies like Dredd, 300, and A History of Violence. Hypertime is to examine movies that were almost made and see what kind of impact they would have had on audiences of the time, or maybe how they would have changed the face of superhero movies as we know it. Many of you may be wondering what's first on the chopping block for both shows. Well, for Hypertime, we're going to take a look at Green Arrow Escape from Supermax, which was written by David S. Goyer. And for Howitzer's Line of Fire, we'll be looking at X-Men. Until next time, keep your head down because you're in the line of fire. I'm Ryan Howitzer, and I'll see you.